Though some people might appreciate, there are others who say this pure war he creates. So we'll never get any peace. I know that he just can't get no peace. No matter how he tries, he'll never till he dies. He just can't get no peace. Mr. Kissinger, the messenger.
Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Mudzimu Mukuru. Give him praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters. You know, we're going live again. And as you can see, our subject for today is Kissinger, the wicked die old. Yes, indeed, kings and queens, and many of us, all of us, you know, we have arose yesterday morning to the news of the death of Henry Kissinger, one of the world's most well-known sociopaths, psychopaths, murderers, kings and queens. Yes, indeed, you know, the man has a prolific reputation in the mass killing and murder of millions of people around the world. And so it is only correct that as African people, when a global figure of that level of note, dies, that we engage an analysis of that legacy from a Pan-African perspective, from a Black nationalist perspective, from a universal African nationalist perspective. And that is what we're going to do today, kings and queens. So I hope you're ready for the thing. Going to engage a few articles and read through the history of this psychopath and his legacy in today's world. And it's very interesting, you know. One of the things that has become apparent to me is the language. Yeah, you know, I always pay attention to the language that is used in the media. By the way, let me know if me can be heard. Yeah, if one can hear me. And as you come through, let me do the housekeeping. Click the link. Sorry, click the like button, kings and queens. Hit the like button as you come through. Share the link far and wide. Make the people them know say gotkushTV is live, engaging and a Pan-African analysis on the life and legacy of one Henry Kissinger. Yes, indeed, kings and queens. It's very necessary for us to engage these things. And so, yeah, give me a signal. Let me know so I can be heard. I do believe I can be, you know, because all looks good on my end of the situation. But, you know, it's good to hear from the people them in this time, all right? And so we're not going to be too long. We're going to, you know, go read through some pieces of history in regards to Henry Kissinger's legacy on the African continent and touch on its relationship to the Caribbean a little piece as well. All right. And so, as I was saying, the news media as it stands right about now is, I haven't seen it as much on the British news as I expected it to be. You know, quite a noted figure who had relationships with many British prime ministers and other politicians, although most of those who are ex-prime ministers at the moment have sent their condolences and well wishes and, you know, memoriams and obituaries and celebrations of life of this man. I noticed Tony Blair has sent his out. Wemnium, not Gordon Brown, David Cameron has sent his, you know, lauding the virtues and the brilliance of the intellect and the statesman-like virtues of Henry Kissinger. We have to pay attention to these things in our family. But then you notice a terminology, yeah, that I've seen in the mainstream Western media to describe this man in the news reports, and that word is controversial. Yes, he was a controversial figure for many. You know, controversial. Yes, and this word controversial, when it's used at moments like these, is really a euphemism for barbarous savage. Yeah, you know, but he was one of our barbarous savages. Yeah, he's a barbarous savage that, you know, was worked in our political interest as the geopolitical West. If a man with Henry Kissinger's record had been operating in the quote-unquote Islamist world or the quote-unquote communist world, words such as tyrant, you know, totalitarian, you know, mass murderer, you know, would be used. Terms like war crimes, yeah, would be human rights violations, would be used, and his legacy would be contextualized in that context. But because he was a darling of the West and the Western elite, as far as they tend to go, as far as mainstream media reports, is the use of the word controversial. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? That means he's done some questionable things, but he did the questionable things in our interest. And whenever they use that term controversial, it's a signal also of the extent of the wickedness. That means the wickedness is so extensive. Yeah, it's so extensive that they can't really hide it completely. Generally speaking, politicians have degrees of separation that grant them plausible deniability. You know what I mean? Well, this is not the case for this particular individual. And so they have to acknowledge it somewhat, but they acknowledge it with the use of the word controversial. All right. So I have left some links here for further reading on this individual in the description to the video. Yeah, so check that out. All right, check it out and take it in. It's some extensive reading, but you can do your own studies. Yeah, because we're not going to focus on everything today. All right, but we're going to contextualize our exploration with the word sounds of the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who taught us to read and study thoroughly the historic character and behavior of the white man. Know it so well as to always be able to be on guard against any professions of the white man in his suggested friendship for the African. In reading books written by white authors of whatsoever kind, be aware of the fact they are not written for your particular benefit or for the benefit of your race. They always write from their own point of view and only in the interest of their own race. Never swallow wholly what the white man writes or says without critically analyzing it and understanding it. The white man's trick is to deceive other people for his own benefit and profit. Always be on your guard against him in whatsoever he does and says. Never take chances with him. His school books are all fixed up to suit his purposes, to put him on top and to keep him on top. Don't trust him. Beware, beware. Such is the wisdom of the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Hail to the power of the word. And so we're going to engage that. The reason why it's necessary to contextualize in that context is because of the fact that Henry Kissinger is an historical figure. And when we look at the media at the moment, the media gives us a signal into how he is going to be documented and appraised within popular history that is going to be taught to our children and grandchildren in the future. And so we're going to explore. So you might, if you have been paying attention and going beyond just, general news media reports, have come across some of his exploits. And one of the links that I've put in the description to this video explores in some detail, his exploits in Cambodia. His actions in Cambodia are, I could say, certainly what has his name in most infamy. And to cut a long story short, this was in the 1970s. During the Vietnam War, America's war on Vietnam, and Henry Kissinger orchestrated the bombing of Cambodia, for absolutely no justifiable reason, and murdered hundreds of thousands of people in Cambodia, even though they had nothing to do with the war. And the bombing for a period of about 5 years went unacknowledged and unnoticed because he was bombing them secretly. So the world never really knew what was going on in Cambodia. And so that is one aspect of this man's legacy. Whilst he served as variously Secretary of State and Foreign Policy Advisor for the Nixon administration and then the administration of Ford after Nixon. Okay, but we want to explore an aspect of Henry Kissinger's legacy that has been less spoken about. If you want to study those things again, once again, check out the links in the description. This man has a prolific legacy, and by many estimations, is the most significant individual operating in Western foreign policy for the last half a century or more. Okay. It's necessary also to note that after he was, an official in the American government as Secretary of State and Foreign Policy Advisor, he established a private corporation called Kissinger Associates, through which he continued to exert significant influence on Western foreign policy, and became a service provider to the Western corporate elite. And many times we're given the illusion that there is a separation between American or Western political establishment and its corporate establishment, between its political institutions and its economic institutions. These institutions are one and the same if we understand what political economy is and what political economy means. And so you find that there's a relationship between destabilization as instituted by America in a nation and the influx of American corporations, for example, in said nations, whereby resources are being extracted. Yeah, this is an obvious, well-stated connection. Okay, but we're going to read from two pieces, and they're related. They're covering the same pieces of history, so some of the information will be repeated, but one gives a bit more context than the other. The first is an article, published in The Guardian in May this year, when Kissinger turned 100 years old. And yes, indeed, Kings. In fact, you know what? Before I go into that reading, I was struck by check out the channel and the media institution Africa Stream, run by our good brother Ahmed Kabelo, who is from Sudan, and currently lives in Kenya. And they put out, a meme and some information about and it called "Always Live So Long," and they feature Henry Kissinger, George H.W. Bush, that's Daddy Bush, who died in 2018, and Ronald Reagan, and Kissinger dies at 100 a couple of days ago, or yesterday. No, a couple of days ago, 29th, he died. George H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, died in 2018 at the age of 94. Ronald Reagan died at the age of 93 in 2004. If I recall, I can't remember how old Maggie Thatcher was, but I believe she was in her 80s when she died. We know Liz dead one day, in our 90s, and so they have a thing here on this: always live so long. All of them always live so long, you know what I'm saying? And so it's an interesting point, which is why we've titled our show today "The Wicked Die All." The wicked die all. You know what I mean? If we think about the number of our leaders who have died since the 1970s, when Kissinger was came on the scene as far as official politics, then we would see, and died young as well, we would see that it seems in this world governed by the geopolitical machinations of global white supremacy, Western imperialism, the wicked die all. And so let's explore some of the machinations of Henry Kissinger. So we're going to read first and foremost from a Guardian article, which was published in May of this year, entitled "Kissinger at 100, How His Sordid Diplomacy in Africa Fueled War in Angola and Prolonged Apartheid." Historians say that the involvement in Africa of the former U.S. Secretary of State, who is 100 this week, this was in May, during his drew the U.S. into Angola's war and aided apartheid after the Soweto uprising. Statesman, a war criminal, his troubled legacy in pictures. And I just want to say, by the way, that it's almost impossible to be a statesman of the geopolitical West in this day and age and not be a war criminal. So these two things are not mutually exclusive. All right, let's make that very, very clear. Author of the piece, Peter Bowman. Yeah, written and published Thursday, the 25th of May, which is in fact Africa Liberation Day, 2023. The men who sat down for dinner at the Hotel Bodenmais, in West Germany, on 23rd of June 1976 were exclusively white, although the issue to be discussed was the path to majority black rule in Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe. At the table was John Vorster, Prime Minister of Apartheid South Africa. With him were ambassadors, diplomats, and security officials. Pride of place, however, was reserved for the U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who opened the proceedings with a racially tinged joke. It was a dinner that took place in the midst of a frantic 2-year period when the world's most high-profile diplomat, who had dismissively ignored Africa for much of his time in office in the Nixon and Ford administrations, was taken with a sudden interest in the continent, then armed with a dangerous Cold War logic, the Cold War being the standoff between Eastern, Western Europe, Russia, in heading Eastern Europe at the time, and America having been thrown the baton by Britain heading Western Europe during this period, the period after Mass European War II, misnomered World War II. Then armed with a dangerous Cold War logic, he applied himself to successive crises in Ethiopia, Angola, and Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, in the search for a quick fix to burnish a reputation that was beginning to be eclipsed. As Kissinger turns 100 on the 27th of May, his interventions in Africa have once again come under the spotlight, not only for the multiple failures that emerge from an approach befogged by deception, secrecy, and browbeating, but for the long-lasting and dangerous consequences of his efforts in Southern Africa in particular. And so we see an image here, and pupils used the Regina Mundi Church as a refuge during a student uprising on the 16th of June 1976 in Soweto. This is the Soweto uprisings, and for brief explanation, the children in schools, studying in schools in Mama Africa, Azania, South Africa to be specific, began to protest against the imposition of what became known as the Afrikaans language, which is the Dutch language, the language of the Boer colonizers and murderers and oppressors of African people in Azania, South Africa. And so they began to protest the imposition of this language within the education system. And as a result, the white supremacist government, the Western imperialist, the European imperialist government of Azania, South Africa, waged a reign of terror against children who came out to peacefully protest against the conditions of their education, massacring hundreds. Yes, and that's probably an underestimate. Okay, it's necessary to note, however, also that during this period was the period in which the white supremacist government of South Africa during this time had significantly intimate relationships with the state of Israel, and the latter assisted them in the acquisition and development of a nuclear arsenal. And that's just a point because it's relevant to our current moment and what is currently dominating our news, brothers and sisters. I want to encourage all of you to please use the chat, you know what I'm saying, and share the link far and wide, and like the video as you come through as well, where it's exploring the Pan-African history of a demon by the name of Henry Kissinger. Let's go. In the space of a handful of years, Kissinger would be involved in a murky intervention in Angola that would complicate the emerging conflict there that followed Portugal's withdrawal after a coup in Lisbon. So basically, there was a dictator operating in Portugal, and a left-wing political party waged a coup against said dictator, and that created an opening for African nations that had been colonized by Portugal to push for independence, because the French and the Portuguese, were hardline. The British realized quickly they might give up them colonies, but the Portuguese in particular was not looking to give up nothing, and so it was this upheaval in Portugal that created an opening for those who were already fighting for liberation in places like Angola and Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique to push harder, and many of them, those nations, gained independence during and after, shortly following this particular event in Portugal. Okay. He became the first US Secretary of State to visit South Africa in 3 decades. Delivering prestige to the apartheid regime in the aftermath of the Soweto massacre in 1976. So this is after now the racist, white supremacist, Western imperialist government of South Africa had committed this horrific act against children. Yes, in Azania, South Africa. Kissinger visits South Africa in 76 after this fact, to restore relations with the white people, his brothers and sisters in South Africa. When scores of demonstrating school children and others were gunned down by the police. And while he would strong-arm Rhodesia's pariah Prime Minister Ian Smith into making a declaration that he would accept majority black rule. Stay tuned, because we're going to come back to the political intentionality behind this. It would be a failed initiative undertaken in questionable faith and underpinned by his own sympathies for white minority communities who were ruling Rhodesia and South Africa with racist policies. The consequences, as historians point out, were a hugely prolonged war in Angola and an added lease of life for apartheid. The war that they're referring to, which we're going to get into in a bit more detail shortly, is a civil war that basically erupted after Angolan independence in 1979 and basically lasted for 27 years up until the year 2002. Tragic sequence of events that took place in Angola and resulted in the death of millions, of Africans. And we have to point that out because it's sometimes easy to forget how recent the levels of destabilizations that Mama Africa has been subjected to, have existed. Okay, it's very, very important to recognize that the civil war in Angola lasted on and off, and mostly on and off, for 27 years. Okay, it's impossible to develop a nation with such high levels of violence. In a scathing memoir written for American Diplomacy in 2010, the former U.S. ambassador to Nigeria, Donald Esom, who served as the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, delivered a withering assessment of Kissinger, describing African ambassadors and representatives at the UN as routinely rebuffed and neglected by the Secretary of State's office, and his disdain for Black Africa. Kissinger would become engaged by events in Angola, where after a left-wing military coup in 1974 against Lisbon Estado Novo dictatorship, the new regime immediately stopped all military action in the African colony, leading to independence in 1975. Concerned that Marxist-Leninist People's Movement for Liberation of Angola better known as the MPLA, yeah, was one of the combatants in the civil war that followed the coup, would sweep to power, opening the way for Soviet influence. Kissinger moved to engage with Africa. So basically, Cold War, yeah. Russia and America are vying for influence in the world, and the mere allusion of anybody on the planet Earth to any form of quote unquote left-wing ideology, whether it be social democracy, whether it be socialism proper, or whether it be communism proper, understanding that there are distinctions between these three things as it relates to geopolitics. America would use this as an excuse for political intrigue and often military intervention under the pretext that being socialist or communist leaning, or maybe not even being any of those things, but just having friendly relationships with Russia, made you a proxy of Russia and said to be therefore a threat to American interests. In his memoir, Esom summarized Kissinger's ambition. He was determined to seize in Angola what he considered a timely opportunity to display America's and Henry Kissinger's strength. This is partly because America was in fact losing the war in Vietnam. And not only were they losing the war in Vietnam, they were losing the battle to win over the support of the American masses on the war from the late 1960s. He believed that defeating the MPLA, which he considered pro-Soviet, could expunge the image of a flabby United States in retreat after Vietnam. Moreover, he thought he could do it on the cheap with clandestine CIA collaboration. He was soon to be proved dead wrong. If Angola was important, not least after the Cuban intervention to support the MPLA after South Africa invaded and its forces drove almost to the capital, Luanda, it was because Kissinger believed that should Angola fall, neighboring states could follow, including Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, ultimately threatening South Africa. Now, one of the secrets of the revolutionary and independence era in Mama Africa is the extent to which different nations collaborated in armed struggle, so-called, yeah, in armed resistance to colonization, okay? And so the for example, as it relates to Zimbabwe, yeah, there were a number of nations surrounding Zimbabwe, including Mozambique and others, who contributed to the Zimbabwe liberation effort, yeah, and they were referred to as the frontline states. And so the collaboration between these African revolutionary forces in the fight for independence and in the fight against colonialism signaled the possibility of greater political unity within the context of an independence movement. And so these Western powers had to fight diligently against that, because that was not in their interest in general, and particularly the interest of their corporations. He had a reputation for being a strategic genius, says Nancy Mitchell, a historian and author of Jimmy Carter in Africa, Race and the Cold War. Jimmy Carter, another Western imperialist, but just happens to be on the other side of the political spectrum. And as the man that we see pictured here, sitting next to Henry Kissinger, is one Baba Julius Nyerere. And he is famous for having said that words to the effect that America is a one-party state But with typical American extravagance, they have two of them. Yeah, worse to that effect. Yeah, America is a one-party state, but due to typical American extravagance, they have two of them. Okay, let me see. Where was I up to? Policy in Africa. Uh, like of witness of his entire policy. Sorry, but if you study Kissinger, what Kissinger did in Angola and Rhodesia, it really sheds light on the weakness of his entire policy in Africa, but also in the Middle East and Vietnam. He misread the situation in Angola from the start. He never expected the Cubans to intervene. Echoing Esam, Mitchell sees the period of Kissinger's diplomacy in Africa as, quote, very sordid and damaging. Not least his whirlwind tour of African leaders in 1976, which saw him fleetingly meet Tanzania's Julius Nyerere, Zambia's Kenneth Kaunda, among others, leaving behind a legacy of distrust, meaning that those two in particular never trusted this man after they met him. This is Mitchell now speaking. He really dismissed the whole continent of Africa until he thought he could get a reputational gain by intervening in Angola and saving it from American influence. He didn't study Africa. He went in with a very typical racism of the time, a contempt for all developing countries, and thought he could get an easy victory which he needed after the collapse of South Vietnam, said Mitchell. He even said it about himself when he quipped to a British Foreign Office official that it was a mixture of extreme arrogance and naivety. Bit more to go, family. And we're going to go on to our next article. As Mitchell points out, while Kissinger spent hours in talks with Rhodesia's and South Africa's white leaders on his whistle-stop tour of black leaders, he either failed to meet key players such as Samora Machel in Mozambique, was unaware of the importance of others, including Robert Mugabe, whose ZANU-PF forces were threatening the white regime in Rhodesia, or spent a mere 7 minutes with Joshua Nkomo, Mugabe's chief rival. The consequence was that the leaders of the frontline states, who Kissinger needed to persuade to buy into his plans for majority rule in Rhodesia, were either unimpressed or deeply distrustful, undermining his efforts from the start. Let's get to the end of this one, then we'll go on to the next one. There was another issue. Kissinger's innate sympathies with white minority rule. By the way, so bear in mind, the anti-apartheid movement is raging around the world at this point. And we must always remember the extent to which Britain and America in particular, and the Western world in general, supported and backed, politically, economically, and otherwise, this white racist government in Azania, South Africa, to the very bitter end. Yeah, it's very, very important for us to remember these things. All right. The innate sympathies with white minority rule seen through his Eurocentric prism, as Peter Vale, a historian at University of Pretoria, wrote in a recent essay for The Conversation, where he described Kissinger's record in Africa as dismal and said he neither ended colonialism nor minority rule in the region. This is important because America likes to paint itself as this benevolent force that was supporting the decolonization of Africa and so on and so forth. Nothing could be further from the truth. He wrote, Kissinger's interest in Southern Africa in the mid-70s was predicated on the idea that balance would return if the interests of the strong were restored. He failed to understand that the struggle for justice was changing the world and diplomacy itself. Yeah. So I'm going to pause this article here, because in the next piece, we're going to get into a bit more context. And the reason why, I'm going to this next piece is because we don't want to treat Kissinger as though he is some outlier of Western political thinking and action. We don't want to treat Kissinger as though he's an exception to an otherwise benevolent rule. Kissinger is a standard bearer of American foreign policy in particular and European foreign policy in general. He is not unique. He simply is one of the more high-profile names in an institutional, transnational geopolitical order within which these people exercise inordinate power over global politics and economics. Recently, in one of our ZIVANAYI sessions, we were feasting on the wellspring of wisdom, yes, of Nana Amos Wilson, and the extent to which we live in a world that is governed by political power of groups and collective interests versus the idea of individualism. Okay, and so it's easy for us to get caught up on Henry Kissinger, the individual. But when you look at the news reports and documentaries of Henry Kissinger, they will tell you that he was a man dedicated to sustaining and maintaining the power of America in particular and the West in general. These people are heads of institutions and organizations. They're not individuals working for their own personal individual interest. Yes, these are individuals who are members of institutions, organizations, corporations that have a significant influence on global geopolitics in the interest of sustaining and maintaining and imposing European white minority rule over the entire planet. And so we're going to read an excerpt from a book, yes, a book by the name of The Good Die Young, The Good Die Young, Verdict on Henry Kissinger, okay, Verdict on Henry Kissinger. And the good thing about how this is broken down is that it doesn't just focus on Kissinger, the individual. We get the historical context, that through which we can understand Western and American foreign policy in general. Okay, so stay tuned, kings and queens, as we got through this situation. As you come through, for those who are just coming through with us, engaging some exploration of the machinations of the demon Henry Kissinger in Mama Africa. All right, so stay tuned. I will take a few questions, and as and where I can answer them, I will. So feel free to check your question, put your questions in the chat, and we'll take those. At gotkushTV, at gotkushTV, at gotkushTV, so I can see them and note them and come back to them. All right. Okay. So let's get into this reading now. For Ronald Reagan and a great many Americans, the arrival of Cuban troops in Angola in 1975 epitomized the poison fruit of detente, which is the easing of relations. So we're suggesting here that there was a suggestion or an inclination towards easing of relations between America and Cuba at one point, and there was at this point as well easing of relations between America and China. At the same time, and that was all inspired by the need to weaken the influence of Russia in the geopolitical sphere. The way they saw it, the Soviets had dared for the first time to engage in a massive military intervention in Africa. So this is the idea now that because Cuba and Russia were friends, and in fact, Russia was a benefactor of Cuba for a significant period of time, any action on the part of the Cubans was done under the influence of and on behalf of Soviet Russia. They had pushed their Cuban proxies forward, and they had found this act of naked aggression both painless and profitable. President Ford and Kissinger had been unable to devise an effective response. They had boasted and made demands unbacked by action, Reagan charged. Yeah. So Reagan, was a critic of Ford and Kissinger, although Kissinger would be going to be an advisor for during his administration also, but officially he distanced himself, from Kissinger, and led an administration that was no less murderous, criminal, and imperialist for such an action. Okay, this narrative contains only one element of truth. Kissinger and Ford, had fumbled in response to the Cuban intervention in Angola. The backdrop of the story is straightforward. In the late 1950s, France and Britain, Africa's major colonial powers, had concluded that delaying the inevitable end of their imperial rule would risk turning the local elites into enemies, whereas promptly granting independence would allow the metropoles to retain economic and political influence in their former colonies. Belgium had followed suit, but Portugal, who was then the colonizer of Angola, bucked the tide. As a result, in the early 1960s, armed struggle broke out in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique. Yeah, and as we say Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, let us evoke the names of Baba Amilcar Cabral, revolutionary leader of Guinea-Bissau, and Samora Machel, revolutionary leader of Mozambique, and also Josina Machel, one of the revolutionary leaders within Frelimo, the revolutionary organization and army of Mozambique. This posed a serious problem for American policymakers. The U.S. Air Force had critical military facilities in the Lajes Air Base in the Azores, which meant Washington wanted to remain friendly with Portugal without appearing to support its colonial wars in Africa. From the Kennedy through the Nixon administrations, American officials asserted that the United States sold weapons to Portugal only on condition that they not be used in Africa. And this is what you call political trickery, politics. But the Portuguese diverted the weapons there anyway, as if the Americans didn't know that they were going to do so. We would have been fools not to have done so, a Portuguese general remarked. Now and then, the Americans would grumble, but it was always for show. Look, like Portugal, them don't know already. So when America said to don't send use your weapons, the weapons that we're selling you, and not the only weapons that we are selling you, the weapons, the American government creates markets for the private military corporations, yes, that operate on its behalf. Okay, and that's another story for another time in terms of in-depth analysis. Yeah, but when they say America sold arms, what they mean is American private corporations, yes, had a market created for them by the American government. Okay, in April 1974, Portuguese military officers overthrew their country's dictatorship, as we mentioned earlier. They moved quickly towards decolonization. Guinea-Bissau became independent in September 1974. Baba Amilcar Cabral had already been killed by that point in 1972, if I'm not mistaken, and Mozambique the following June. In both countries, there had been only one guerrilla movement which inherited power in a smooth transition. Angola, however, had three guerrilla movements: the Popular Movement for Liberation of Angola, the MPLA, the National Liberation Front of Angola, the FNLA, and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA. Okay, And the most significant forces as it relates to the Civil War became the MPLA and UNITA. They fought each other as bitterly as they had the Portuguese. The MPLA leaders espoused an eclectic interpretation of Marxism-Leninism that was, Yugoslav officials noted, quote, adapted to the specific conditions and needs of Angola. What I mean is that they weren't, what's the word? Standard atypical Marxist Leninist to the letter of Marxist Leninist law. Yes, they tried to tailor the analysis that they got from Marxist Leninism specific to the African context. Okay, the FNLA and UNITA were anti-communist but led by corrupt and unprincipled men. Even American officials acknowledged that the MPLA, quote, stood head and shoulders above the other two groups. Yeah. All right. I won't go into any further analysis here because I think it will become clearer in the reading. So let's just go forward. Yeah. The new Portuguese government and the three Angolan movements agreed that a transitional government would rule until independence. On November 11th, 1975. Civil war erupted, however, in the spring of 1975. The following July, both South Africa and the United States began providing the FNLA and UNITA with weapons and military instructors to crush the MPLA. So note now, there's a civil war. A civil war has taken place, yeah, in Angola, which is not unusual. There are many places on the African continent after independence in which civil wars broke out. However, the United States and South Africa, this is now again white, racist, apartheid, minority rule, Western imperialist South Africa. Okay, not the neo-colonial South Africa that we know of today. All right, began to send military aid and also hired mercenaries. Yeah, so particularly South Africa was had hired mercenaries that were operating throughout Angola and other regions of the African continent to stave off the growing tide of armed resistance against colonization. Okay. South Africa was motivated by the need to shore up apartheid at home. Now, this is important because a lot of the revolutionary movements, yeah, throughout the 1960s and the 1970s were speaking strongly on the issues of South Africa, white minority rule, and Zimbabwe, then called Rhodesia, white minority rule. And so therefore it was understood that an increase in decolonization in the African continent, particularly as a result of armed resistance, would naturally result in an invasion, yes, of South Africa by Africans in support of revolutionary and anti-apartheid forces in South Africa, in Azania, South Africa. Yeah, so the ANC and the PAC, the Pan African Congress of Azania, and the African National Congress would receive increased military support from independent revolutionary or at least anti-colonial forces from the rest of Mama Africa. Yeah. South Africa was motivated by the need to shore up apartheid at home and to eliminate any threat to its illegal rule over Namibia. Yeah, another story for another time. The sprawling country sandwiched between Angola and South Africa. South African officials feared that the MPLA's implacable hostility to apartheid and its promise to assist the liberation movement in Southern Africa. By contrast, UNITA and the FNLA offered Pretoria their friendship. So we see that there are forces, there's a force in Angola that is uh, taking a more hardline revolutionary stance at this point. The MPLA of this time is very different to the MPLA of today. The MPLA still exists and is in government in Angola, but it's a very different political organization than it was then. While the MPLA was openly hostile to apartheid South Africa, UNITA and the FNLA were moderate on the issue and even willing to be friendly with the white supremacist racist terrorist regime in South Africa during this period of time. In the United States, senior officials from the Departments of State, Defense, and the Treasury, notice, State, Defense, and the Treasury. Bear that in mind when they try to run this illusion on you that the market forces are different from the government forces within Western Empire. It's nonsense. Yeah, it's nonsense. They all act in concert and for the same objective. Advise against a covert operation. So these Departments of State, Defense, and Treasury advised against a covert operation. An MPLA victory, they argued, would not threaten U.S. interest, but one man disagreed. Here we go. Henry Kissinger. And Kissinger ruled the roost. He was Secretary of State and National Security Advisor at this point, simultaneously. He served as both, I just did this, National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. President Ford, who knew very little about foreign policy and nothing about Angola, deferred to Kissinger. So effectively, as far as foreign policy is concerned, Kissinger is acting with the authority of the President of the United States himself. Why would Kissinger plan a covert operation in Angola against the advice of his aides? It was not to counter the Kremlin. Notice this now. Bear this in mind. Listen carefully. It was not to counter the Kremlin being Soviet Russia. Yes, and the machinations of Soviet Russia in Angola. The Soviets were behaving with great restraint in Angola. They distrusted the MPLA. So Soviet Russia were not as much in bed, yes, with the MPLA as some would have had us believe at that time and would still have us believe today, and did not want to jeopardize the sort to negotiations with the United States. Yeah, so bear this in mind now. Remember that we talked about the Tante. Yeah, there was some lessening, easing of tensions, yeah, between a lot of these forces during a particular moment in time. Therefore, they had sent very little aid to the MPLA. Russia had sent very little aid to the MPLA. Nor did Kissinger argue that American interests in Angola were threatened. What impelled him to act was Vietnam. In April of that year, the South Vietnamese regime had collapsed. For Kissinger, this debacle was both a national and personal humiliation. America had to project itself as the strong arm of global order. Yes. It undermined his standing at home and it made America look weak abroad. A display of resolve in Angola would exorcise the ghost of Vietnam. And the installation of a client regime in Luanda, capital of Angola, would provide a cheap boost to American prestige and his own reputation. By September, however, it was evident that the MPLA was winning the Civil War despite the arms and instructors that Washington and Pretoria, South Africa, had supplied to the FNLA and UNITA. Yes, but listen, it was winning not because of Cuban aid. So the MPLA was beating the Western-backed forces without significant Russian or Cuban assistance at this point. It was winning not because of Cuban aid, no, because no Cubans were yet fighting in Angola or superior weapons, but because, as the CIA station chief in Luanda noted, the MPLA was, quote, more effective, better educated, better trained, and better motivated. That's a quote from the CIA station chief, whose name I don't know. But yeah, and I should have properly researched that. Yeah, so another day we'll bring the name of the CIA station chief in Luanda during this period. Okay, all right. But he said that the MPLA was more effective, better educated, better trained, and better motivated than the forces that he was funding and supporting and backing at the time. Washington urged Pretoria to send troops, and on October 14, a South African armored column invaded Angola. As the column raced towards Luanda, the MPLA resistance crumbled. The MPLA turned to Cuba, asking for troops. The South Africans would have seized the capital had Fidel Castro not decided on November 4 to respond favorably to the MPLA's appeals. The Cuban forces, despite their initial inferiority in numbers and weapons, halted the South African onslaught. The official South African historian of the war wrote, "The Cubans really surrendered and quite simply fought cheerfully unto the death." Pan-African analysis of this particular dynamic requires us to note that the military forces that came into into Angola from Cuba were Africans who understood, the majority of them, the overwhelming majority of them were Africans who understood the direct relationship between the Africans in Cuba and the Africans in Central Africa, not just Angola, like Congo, Angola, so on and so forth. They pressured, by Castro's own admission, they pressured him to be able to go and fight on behalf of their brothers and sisters because they understood that they were the same people, basically. A significant number of the Africans in Cuba, as throughout the Americas, really, are descendants of those of us who came from Congo and Angola, etc., etc. Yeah. So bear this in mind, you know, brothers and sisters, yeah, that the Cuban relationship to the Angola war effort was on the part of Africans from Angola reaching out to Cuba because of the fact that the Americans under Kissinger, the CIA, and the Vorster in Southern Africa had sent mercenaries to fight the MPLA. Yes. And fund the anti-MPLA forces within Angola, because the other forces were, one, friendly to white racist imperialist South Africa, and two, as a result, friendly to white racist imperialist America, Britain, and the West by extension. Okay, all right. Let us continue. We're detailing. For those who have just joined us, feel free to hit the like button, share the link far and wide. Share the link far and wide, kings and queens. Yeah, we are providing some Pan-African analysis on the death of a devil by the name of Henry Kissinger, who was during the period of history that we're talking about at the moment, was the Secretary of State and Foreign Policy aide in the American government. After which he became an advisor to the Western corporate elite. Yes, the Western corporate elite. Yeah, ensuring the power of America and the West geopolitically and economically throughout the world, yeah, after this period. And we know less about his machinations as a within his private corporation, yeah, Kissinger Associates. Yeah, we know less about that because the one asset that public service provides is that records are often, though not always, made public. And so his actions in this regard are far more known than his actions as a private corporation operating in the geopolitical sphere. Yeah. And his legacy also requires us to assess the nature of corporations within the geopolitical order, because his corporation were basically well-paid hired hands to operate in geopolitics. It's a private corporation that was paid by governments and other corporations to act in the interest of Western hegemony. Yeah. All right, so bear all of those things in mind as we go forward. Once again, like up the video, family, like up the video and share the link far, far, far and wide, wide, wide as we engage some analysis of these dynamics. All right, we go on, and we're reading at the moment from a book called The Good Die Young. It's an excerpt from a book called The Good Die Young, The Verdict on Henry Kissinger. Neither Kissinger nor his aides had imagined that the Cubans might intervene. And as Reagan pointed out, they botched their response. Yeah, so they didn't expect that Cuban intervention. And so, yeah, let's continue. Kissinger tried to enlist the help of the French and the Chinese to no avail. He ordered the CIA to raise an army of mercenaries. But the few men that the agency gathered were cut to pieces by the Cubans as soon as they reached Angola. There was only one practical response. We should assign a major role to South Africa in restoring freedom in Angola. Senator Jesse Helms urged. Yes, so American senators are now looking to expand racist, apartheid, white supremacist South Africa's role in Angola. We have to remember, this is not so long ago. We're talking about the mid-1970s. Aya. Yes? All right. Ford and Kissinger would have been happy to oblige, but Pretoria demanded that Washington openly endorse its invasion. So what was happening, as we read earlier, America was acting behind the scenes, but not stating the thing publicly. Yeah, they were giving weapons to Angola. Sorry, not to Angola, to Portugal. Yes, to fight against the anti-colonial forces in Angola, but they wouldn't state it publicly. And if anything came out, they would say that they were selling those weapons to Portugal with the condition that they would not use those weapons to fight against the anti-colonial forces in Angola. But the Portuguese did. Yeah. And the Portuguese are on record as having said, well, we know them don't mean it really. Yeah. So the white racists them in South Africa and P.W. Botha is on record later as saying that, yeah, man, them know that the Americans secretly agree with what them are going with in South Africa. Them know, them not gonna say it publicly, but them know, your brethren, and all these things. Yeah. So at this point, Pretoria, the white people, them, the Anglo board, them in South Africa, them tired of Washington duplicity and hypocrisy. Them say them want Washington to openly come out and say, yeah, we support South Africa. And what them do? What them both for do in Angola? Yeah, Pretoria demanded that Washington openly endorse its invasion and pledge military assistance if the Soviet bloc escalated. For Ford, facing a presidential election in 1976, this was politically impossible. Yeah, again, the anti-apartheid movement is rising, you know what I'm saying, and even the white people them in places like America are beginning to jump on the thing, and so it becomes politically suicidal from an electoral point of view to be openly in bed with South Africa to this extent, although they seem to manage it, yeah, in many different ways, yeah, by demonizing the ANC and the PAC. All right, remember, saying Mandela was listed as a terrorist in these nations for a significant period of time. So we note again that one of the ways in which they legitimize their support of white terrorist regimes is to label those who fight them terrorists. Okay, let's bear that in mind, because we can see that happening right about now. As the South African operation unraveled and credible evidence surfaced in the Western press that Washington and Pretoria had colluded in Angola, the White House drew back. It claimed ignorance and condemned the South African intervention. This outraged South Africa's defense minister, who told Parliament, "I know of only one occasion in recent years we crossed a border that was in the case of Angola, when we did so with the approval and knowledge of the Americans. But they left us in the lurch. We are going to retell the story. The story must be told of how we, with their knowledge, went in there and operated in Angola with their knowledge, and how they encouraged us to act. And when we had nearly reached the climax, we were ruthlessly left in the lurch." Yeah. So America sent South Africa in there and funded mercenaries where South Africa sent, and then left them, because it was a public relations disaster. By April of 90, and so again, let me emphasize the fact we're going through this entire history because we don't want to put up Henry Kissinger, yeah, as some outlier. Yeah, no, Henry Kissinger is the standard bearer of wicked American foreign policy. Yeah. The wicked die all, and Henry Kissinger is just one such, operating within an entire network of institutions of Western imperialism. Okay? So singling out Henry Kissinger, the individual, is deficit to requirement in terms of our analysis from a universal African nationalist, Pan-Africanist, Garveyite perspective. Remember, so Garveyite said for study thoroughly the historic character and behavior of the white man. Know it so well as to always be on guard against any professions of the white man in his suggestive friendship for the African. All right, let us go forward. So we're learning now about Kissinger's relationship to the African continent. By the way, it should also be noted that around this same time, yeah, because of Cuba's intervention in Angola, Kissinger was also trying to put pressure on the government of Michael Manley, and Michael Manley particularly, in Jamaica, because Michael Manley had taken a more friendly relationship with Castro and Cuba. And this was considered another act that would seem to weaken the authority of America within the region. Yeah. And so what happens is that America, through Kissinger, steps up its relationship with Edward Seaga in Jamaica and begins to fund political violence, the development of through the development of gangs, yeah, and drugs in Jamaica. Okay. And so a part of the reason why Seaga comes to power, yes, during this era, is because of the support that he's receiving from the American government in general and Henry Kissinger in particular. Yeah. And Henry Kissinger in particular. All right. So that just note that as we go forward. Yeah. This is how it related to the rest of the African world as regards Lever, Siaga, or Manley are Africans, but in the political leadership of a majority African nation. Okay, and so we're engaging the history of what Kissinger was doing in Angola at the moment, and we're providing a Pan-African analysis on this history. Yeah, so this is just the history. All right, what I'm reading is just the history. Okay, but it's necessary for us to make the linkages as we provide the analysis of this particular history. Okay, by April 1976, the Cuban troops had pushed the South Africans back into Namibia, whence they had come. U.S. officials responded to the humiliating defeat with fury. They blasted the Cubans as Moscow's mercenaries. Yeah, they blasted. I said again, American propaganda. Perhaps some believed it. Yeah. The image of Castro as Moscow's proxy was comforting. It cast Cuba's extraordinary internationalism in a squalid light. As former Undersecretary of State George Ball observed, myths are made to solace those who find reality distasteful. And if some find such fantasy comforting, so be it. With the passing of time, however, the evidence that the Cubans sent their troops to Angola on their own initiative without consulting the Soviets has become too compelling to deny. In 1981, the CIA noted that the intervention was, quote, a unilateral Cuban operation designed in great haste. Even Kissinger was forced to reconsider. Castro had confronted the Soviets with a fait accompli. He admitted in his memoirs, Castro had sent his soldiers because of his commitment to what he called the most beautiful cause, the struggle against apartheid. He understood that the victory of the Pretoria-Washington axis would have tightened the grip of white domination over the people of Southern Africa. Kissinger acknowledged that Castro was probably the most genuine revolutionary leader in power. Now, again, yeah, as I've said, from a Pan-African perspective, yeah, and from even the testimony of Castro himself, we have to include the fact that, remember, Cuba, although we may not know this because of the racism that exists in Cuba and the fact that hundreds of Pan-African and Black nationalist organizations were banned in Cuba after the revolution, there are significant numbers. Cuba is a majority African nation, yeah? Lowest estimates I've seen are in the realms of 60-something%, okay? But the people, Africans in Cuba, many of whom were in the army, yes, were enthusiastic to go to Angola and assist our brothers and sisters in Southern Africa on the basis of the fact that these were our African brothers and sisters, yeah? And in fact, even since Kissinger died, I've seen an Indian historian make reference to this fact that Castro said in a speech that basically the army generals who were the descendants of those people who were brought from Angola and the Congo and other parts of Central Africa were enthusiastic to go and fight on behalf of our people and stave off what was known to be an American and Anglo-Boer South African mercenary squad that was sent to Angola. Okay, the tidal wave unleashed by the Cuban victory washed over Southern Africa. Two statements from across the political divide in apartheid South Africa illustrate its psychological impact and the hope it aroused. In February of 1976, as Cuban troops were pushing Pretoria's army out of Angola, a South African military analyst wrote, if Angola, Black troops, Cubans and Angolans, so note that, if Angola, Black troops, Cuban and Angolans can defeat white troops in military exchanges, and that psychological edge, that advantage the white man has enjoyed and exploited over 300 years of colonialism and empire is slipping away. White elitism has suffered an irreversible blow in Angola, and whites who have been there know it. All right. The white giants had retreated and black Africans celebrated. Black Africa is riding the crest of a wave generated by Cuban success in Angola, noted the world South Africa's major black newspaper. Black Africa is tasting the heady wine of the possibility of realizing the dream of total liberation. Kissinger's foolhardy adventure brought thousands of Cuban soldiers to Angola, where they remained until 1991. They protected the Angolan government from South African attacks and trained Namibian and South African freedom fighters. In 1988, they gained the upper hand over the South African army and forced Pretoria to allow free elections in Namibia. In the words of Nelson Mandela, the Cuban victory destroyed the myth of the invincibility of the white oppressor and inspired the fighting masses of South Africa. It was the turning point for the liberation of our continent and my people from the scourge of apartheid. What other country can point to a record of greater selflessness than Cuba has displayed in relations to Africa? Yeah. So the culmination of this story, however, as I said when I began, this civil war in Angola resulted in this civil war in Angola lasted, for about 27 years up until the year 2002. Okay, from 1975 to 2002. It's necessary for us to note that, and millions of people died as a result. There's a tendency, in my humble estimation, to downplay the extent of African collaboration in these anti-colonial wars for the sake of privileging the Cuban assistance, whilst also downplaying the extent to which the Cuban assistance was in fact an African assistance, an African diaspora assistance. Okay. And so when we engage these subjects from a Pan-African analysis, it's necessary for us to point that out. Having said that, what we have seen here is just a snippet, of Kissinger's work on behalf of the American government, in Angola in particular, and Mama Africa in general. And so when someone of the stature of a Henry Kissinger dies, it's an opportunity through the legacy of the individual to look at our relationship to the empire that the individual represented. And I hope I provided some information on that. There is more information in the description to the video, of Kissinger's relationship to forces around the world, not just African. But this is a supreme demon, brothers and sisters, to say the very least. This is a supreme demon, to say the very least. All right. And unfortunately, because of our relationship to Western empire, too few of us are able to put this in proper context and too many of us are openly allegiant to Western empire and therefore have no desire to do so. So good riddance to the demon, and let us understand once again that this demon is not an individual operating in his own interest. This demon is an individual operating as a part of interrelated and interconnected institutions of Western white supremacy and imperialism. And we should understand him not as an outlier, not as a unique individual, but a standard bearer in Western foreign policy and Western imperialism. I'm gonna take a few comments from the chat. I don't have time to bring anybody live, but I'm gonna take some comments from the chat. So if you got anything to say, let me know. You know what I'm saying? Put it in the chat right about now. And we shall see Wagwan. I'm not inclined to go through all the comments just in case a lot of it is just you know, actually let me engage some of them. So Diane McLean. So, but I'm gonna read through a few of the comments. If there is any questions that you want to ask me directly or any specific comments that you want me to read out, then send them now, as I'm just randomly going through stuff. And we'll get them in before we close. We're gonna close soon, yeah. We've got now 5 minutes, let's say. All right. The devil wrote the famous depopulation papers, which I believe is being played out as we speak. They want resources for their children to come. Yes, indeed. It's interesting. Kissinger was also significant in restoring and establishing America's relationship with oil-producing countries in the Arab world. Yeah, and so that relates to that particular statement right there. Mush says they make us hate people like Mugabe and love people like Kissinger and Leopold. This is true. Let's see. Just here to understand ShakaRa's perspective on who Henry Kissinger was, his beliefs, and well, yeah, it's not really my perspective still. Is ShakaRa able to state clearly his motives and agenda and who claims precisely he sought to protect and enforce? So I think that some of the information that I've shared, you know, does that. It's not me. This is I'm just given an explanation of some of his history. Yeah, the fact that Kissinger is an American imperialist is noted by virtue of the fact that he was an agent of the American government, and even after being a direct agent of the American government, as far as formal government, developed a private corporation for said purpose. Yeah, and so this is not my independent research. You know, I don't want to take claim to the research. The sources that I have read from, you know, outline some history. Yeah, and so I'm adding some context to that history that was not detailed in what I've read, and providing some analysis where that is concerned. So hopefully you've got something from that. Portugal put the MPLA in power in Angola. This is false, except maybe when we're dealing with the 1990s, there was a significant shift in dynamics in terms of what the MPLA was, but certainly not during the time that we are talking about. The Portuguese were actively fighting against the MPLA and were being supported by America and apartheid South Africa in doing so. So there's no doubt about that. But yeah, I understand why you would have to say that. So again, yeah, this is it's just false. You know, at the same time though, so what we're seeing here is an attempt to muddy the geopolitical waters so as to give cover and justification and plausible deniability to Western imperialism, right? So the Cold War dynamic, yeah, is still very present in the minds of many of our people, particularly those who are allegiant to Western imperialist empire, geopolitically and economically. Yeah. So the idea, like, okay, let's just put it this way: provide me with the evidence of the fact that during the time when Portugal was actively fighting against the people in Angola, that Portugal were the people that put the MPLA in power. Yeah, provide me with that evidence and the justification for it, then we'll go forward and engage it. But other than that, it's just a random claim. You know what I'm saying? The MPLA government gave South African diamond mining companies concessions and also US oil companies like Gulf Oil. I'm not sure when you're talking about. You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure when you're talking about. But again, like I said, the politics of the MPLA shifted as the Civil War went on, and so on and so forth. So that's entirely possible at a particular period of time. Having said that, this is an attempt to divert from the fact that UNITA and the FNLA were those who were directly supporting Western governments and including apartheid of South Africa at a particular point in time. And so this is just, a comment designed to divert from that fact, yeah, and muddy the waters. So, it says no time frame here, so you can, superimpose that on any period of time, okay? But we are not here engaging in an exploration of the development of the MPLA, all right? What we were doing was engaging in an analysis of the actions of Henry Kissinger in his role as a statesman on behalf of American empire. Okay, so the contradictions of the MPLA, and they had their contradictions notwithstanding, this the machinations of Henry Kissinger, what the impact does this particular statement, even if it were true, have on the machinations of Henry Kissinger, except that the MPLA at this point, in acting in this way, would have made itself a client and neo-colonial puppet of Kissinger and the boys. Yeah, that's all that will be proved by this being true at any point, of the thing. All right, let's see if there's anything else. Starting from the beginning, big up Mr. T, love my brother. Before Cuba, Russia, and gave the MPLA arms, they got it from Portugal. Oh yeah, I get you just restating. But yeah, that's propaganda, repetition, propaganda. Carlos Moore had a better perspective on why Castro went to Angola. Again, it wasn't Castro that went to Angola. It was Africans from Cuba that went to Angola. It was all PR exercise to win third world sentiment. Well, I think that yeah, I'm not sure what you're arguing here against what I said. I would agree that it was PR. As far as Castro is concerned, Castro was unable to resolve the contradiction of racism in Cuba. Yeah, so we're not going to expect him to be able to resolve that as far as South Africa is concerned. What we are certainly, however, putting our faith in is the just indignation of Africans anywhere in the world. And the desire among Africans anywhere in the world to assist our brothers and sisters in apartheid South Africa or anywhere else in the world. So as you've already said, emphasis is often placed on Cuba whilst deracializing the dynamics and failing to emphasize the extent to which that Cuban delegation was in fact an African delegation. So yeah, that's a fact, and one that Carlos Moore would not disagree with. Yeah. So yeah. Fair African perspective brought by ShakaRa. Salute your scholarly prowess. Give thanks, my brother or my sister. Although again, wasn't not my independent research, but I'm just using the history to provide an analysis. So again, what I was reading in and of itself is not Pan-African. It's just a history, okay, a documentation of the history of Henry Kissinger and the American forces in that regard. But yes, the what I'm saying around it is a Pan-African analysis, and I'm glad that you've appreciated something from it. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. I should say that it's necessary for us to be specific in terms of that. So the history relates to us as African people. So we're looking at not Kissinger's work in Cambodia or Vietnam or Bangladesh. Yeah, if you want some more on that, you can read the links in the description to the video. But we have to be specific in terms of analyzing his role in the lives and nations that are governed by or contain majority populations of African people. And so from that perspective, yes, we are dealing with Pan-African analysis just by detailing those history. Okay, you skipped over the part where I gave resources for the claim, so you're not just okay. So if I've missed it, please show where the resources are, because I don't see it. Apart from highlighting Carlos Moore, which I've already dealt with. Carlos Moore is not a resource though; it's a person. So if you're going to provide a resource, then you have to say where he said what he said. But I'm again not disagreeing with Carlos Moore. So I'm not sure what is being debated here, except for the fact that we're trying to run interference for Kissinger. Yeah. So so all of these comments from our good brother Kofi Campbell are designed to mitigate and justify the actions of Kissinger. Yeah, because I'm highlighting in the death of Kissinger the fact that he was a devil operating on behalf of the American government, because our brother is manifestly allegiant to that regime and its political, geopolitical, and economic intentionalities. It seems, especially in this era, because there is more to be said on Kissinger and the American empire's actions in the region of the Americas. Yes. During the 1970s, yeah, that Kissinger was key to. Okay. And that's I'm not going to go into it for the sake of time, because I have to end the stream soon. Yeah, but there's a whole story there. Yeah, just dealing with South and Central America, Kissinger and the American empire, and the legacy that was inherited, yeah, by when name Ronald Reagan in the year 1980. All right, so yeah, you know, we are universal African nationalists, so we don't deny the racism in Cuba and the shortcomings of Castro and his regime and our limiting there. We're not interested in that. However, we are also not cold warriors, and so we are not going to mitigate the devilishment of Henry Kissinger by flagging up Castro and or trying to even the shortcomings of the contradictions of the MPLA over time. Yeah. So I'm not sure what sources were provided for the Angola, you know, MPLA, Portuguese, king making type vibration. And it might, within the context of the post-colonial, the anti-colonial era, there is a history of concessions. So sometimes the colonial power accedes to the demand of the number one force that is fighting them. Yeah. And so and in that, and in some of those instances, for example, Kenya, the actual revolutionary elements are betrayed. Yes. And the colonial power is able to support a neo-colonial entity, a neo-colonial puppet, and sometimes those neo-colonial puppets came from the fighting ranks of the revolutionaries. That is a fact of history. Okay. But to attempt to negate the revolutionary inclinations of the MPLA in general is just, again, simply an act of trying to misdirect. Yeah. Um, um, yeah. So yeah. So and one of the things that I'm noticing in the chat is those who are actually dealing with the issue of Kissinger and America, and those who are not. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You know, so we recognize that those who are obsessed with Castro as though he was the central figure in the thing, which he wasn't, which you've already said. Again, are simply trying to define some run interference for an analysis of Kissinger. Yeah, the devil that is Kissinger. All right, and his work on behalf of successive American empire regimes, and this is on the right and the left. The what I said at the beginning, that whilst he was an advisor to practically every American administration after Ford, who he directly served, Reagan, because of the fact that he believed that Ford and Kissinger had contributed to the weakening of American power on the world stage, particularly through, you know, easing relations with China and them kind of things. That he felt that emboldened, for example, Cuba and Russia. Yeah. Kissinger was an advisor to Reagan. Kissinger was an advisor to Bush Senior. Kissinger was an advisor to, and it was in fact the government of, what's his name? Clinton, Bill Clinton. Yeah, that provided significant rehabilitation for the public image, yeah, of Henry Kissinger in the 1990s. And so you would see him more publicly with presidents after that. So the Bushes, the Obama, up until now. Okay. And so, yeah, Kissinger, again, is not an outlier in relation to American imperialism. Kissinger is a standard bearer in the American imperialist project from a geopolitical and an economic point of view. Kissinger is one of the central players from the 1970s throughout the 1990s, and his institution, Kissinger Associates, is a central player to this day. Okay, a central player to this day. And so his death allows us, despite the fact that there are some, as we've seen, that want to distract us from looking at Kissinger and his role within the context of not being a brilliant individual, but an individual serving institutions of Western imperialist empire. His death gives us a opportunity to explore our relationship, not with Henry Kissinger, but our relationship with Western empire. Yes. And what that means. Yeah. And so when we are able to, as Papa Garvey said, read and study thoroughly the historic character and behavior of the white man, know it so well as to always be on guard against any professions of the white man in his suggested friendship for the African, we were able to see clearly that the strategies, the tactics, and the intentionality that were employed by Henry Kissinger are still very much in play today by all of the noted authorities and individuals, yes, as it stands in today's world. It is people like Henry Kissinger that are able to weaponize the CIA, the World Bank, the IMF, private mercenary forces of America, private arms corporations, yeah, in America, the United Nations, yeah, and leverage the influence of all of the above in terms of American power and that influence over other nation states in order to enact and impose the will of Western imperialism, white supremacy on the rest of the world. So let us be aware of these dynamics, brothers and sisters. Let us be aware of these dynamics and let us know who our enemies and who our friends are. And let us not be distracted, even by those among us as African people who are so allegiant, yes, who are so allegiant to white supremacist imperialist empire that their primary target are the same targets that Kissinger and his boys have had and continue to have in their crosshairs. In as much as Kissinger was armed to the teeth to attack Pan-African revolutionary movements, militarily and psychologically, those forces are still in play today. And there are many of us as African people who, with lacking a conviction towards a knowledge of self and a being of self, are willing to be their puppets and their agents. Let us remind ourselves of our revolutionary freedom fighters in the MPLA, in the Pan-African Congress of Azania, in the African National Congress. And having said all of that, we are coming up on the 100th birthday of Mangaliso Sobukwe. I need to mention that. And if I am able to, there will be a live in honor of Mangaliso Sobukwe in and around the 5th of December. Yes, Mangaliso Sobukwe, founder of the Pan-African Congress of Azania. Yes, a stalwart in our Pan-African revolutionary history, and a man who had a significant influence as well on the development of Pan-African organizations in the UK. So with that, brothers and sisters, I hope ones and ones have learned something from the stream. 1091, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimu Mukulu, give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people. Share.